I walked more than 1,000,000 steps through China and saw amazing and wonderful things. While walking through a park, I found an outdoor love market. What a wild, low-tech, old-school way to find your true love. Another day, another park, I found Chinese getting their ears cleaned. Ear-picking services were popularized 650 years ago in the Ming Dynasty and are common in the Chengdu region of China. One morning I came across what has to be the world's smallest fire truck, equipped to go through these narrow cobblestone streets. China is an amazing, amazing place. In the United States, just about everything you read and hear about China is bad. American politicians say China is evil. It's our enemy. I saw a different side of China. People were kind and generous and certainly didn't treat me like a hostile foreigner. I'm grateful to Flagler College for sending me to China to teach at China Foreign Affairs University in Beijing. Special thanks to Jeremy Wang, director of the college's China program, and all the people at CFAU. So while exploring China and taking all those steps, I walked past factories and apartments, skyscrapers and coffee shops. I saw amazing and wonderful things. One day I walked into a pharmacy. A man in a white smock promptly sat me down, examined my palms, took my pulse, and quickly concluded that my qi was all out of whack. My yin and yang were out of balance. I was in terrible shape, he told me. And well, who am I to question that? Chinese medicine has evolved over 1,000 years. So I went ahead and bought the pills that he offered to try to restore some balance and harmony to my freaking life. Food in China was always an adventure. This is a peanut butter cheeseburger. And here's where I have to confess that I didn't have the courage to eat some of the really interesting things that I found in restaurants. I did try the stir-fried yogurt, but I discovered it was a gimmick because it really isn't stir-fried. Some of the other stuff I didn't try, but I was amazed at the variety. And I just have to say, this is not a Chinese restaurant that you find on the corner in the USA. It's so much more diverse and really interesting. Here's a dish that I was afraid to eat, but it looked interesting. You guys know what that might be? Pig brains, yum yum. I was a coward and didn't eat it, but I did do a lot of walking, as I've said, and on some days I walked 10 or 11 miles, and thankfully there are public bathrooms everywhere. They're really remarkable too. I bet you didn't think this was going to be the subject of my entire talk. But here we go. I could never figure out how to tell the difference between a regular toilet and an emergency toilet. Because for me, sometimes the bathroom is an emergency if I'm out on the street walking, but some of the urinals were really special. Sorry, gals, this is not going to be very interesting to you, but for us guys, you can actually do a little target practice and try to knock the ball into the soccer goal. So that was a lot of fun. And then on one really bitter cold day, I was staying at a little Airbnb, and even the room was cold where I was. And I went into the bathroom, and thankfully there was a little knit toilet seat. So that was pretty cool. I also went to some of China's better-known attractions. I went to see the pandas, and I went with massive, huge crowds to see them. The Chinese love their pandas. They're beloved. They have lived in the bamboo forests of China for several million years. Less than 2,000 remain in their native habitat, and there are about 600 in zoos and breeding centers. The Great Wall is another must-see attraction in China. It crosses 1,000 miles of rough terrain. Stretched out, it's nearly 4,000 miles long. And the Chinese don't call it the Great Wall, they call it the Long Wall. And one popular misconception is that it can be seen from outer space. Chinese astronauts went up thinking they would be able to see it, but they couldn't, and so that myth was dispelled. So I walked about 550 miles all over China, and according to my phone, that was 1.2 million steps. Getting around was surprisingly easy. The Chinese have this transportation thing down, and they do things in a big, big way. This is a giant, giant train station where you can get a bullet train. On the left there, that's a huge new airport near Beijing. And then that other view is of apartment buildings down below. So the cities in China are gigantic. This is Shanghai, which has a population of 29 million and is the world's largest city. I lived in Beijing, which has 22 million, And if you think about all the cities that have more than 1 million, China has 65 cities of more than 1 million, and the US has 10. China has made a remarkable transformation. In the 1970s, the country was poor and isolated. Today, China has the power to reshape the world's existing economic order. Its economy has seen explosive growth unmatched in history. In 1978, the US produced 4 times more steel than China. Now China produces 12 times more than we do. China is the world's largest automaker and makes 3 times more cars than we do. China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. The Chinese people are proud of that, especially considering their past. Their history goes back 5,000 years, and during much of that time, China was the most powerful and advanced civilization on Earth. They suffered many embarrassing defeats in the 1800s. Back then, British traders bought opium in India and sold it in China. The Chinese saw how destructive that was and tried to stop the trade. The British launched 2 wars against China to ensure they continue making money. The British defeated the Chinese and later took control of Hong Kong. The losses were part of what the Chinese would later call the century of humiliation. Today, China is again a world power. China has 57 UNESCO sites, and I tried to see as many as I could. There's a formation in honor of Avatar, the movie. It stands more than 3,500 feet tall. There are also caves containing more than 30,000 Buddhist statues carved in around 495 AD. A few hundred miles to the west is the Terracotta Army, buried with China's first emperor in about 210 before Christ. Farmers discovered the army in 1974. It includes more than 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses. About 600 miles to the south are remarkable rice terraces called Dragon's Backbone, built about 650 years ago and still in use today. There's no doubt that China seeks a return to its glorious past. China has spent more than $1 trillion building roads, bridges, ports, and high-speed trains in dozens of countries as part of what it calls the Belt and Road Initiative. Chinese officials say 147 countries have signed on to or expressed interest in Belt and Road projects. Such projects have deepened Chinese influence around the world. Some U.S. officials are alarmed. We should be concerned about waking up one day and finding we've been outmaneuvered, the commander of the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence said in 2023. China has grown at a dizzying pace. Understandably, some of the Chinese are nostalgic for forgotten traditions lost in the country's rush to develop. Popular TV dramas feature concubines dressed in imperial-era costumes, fueling the trend. I lived in Beijing, and I explored such places as Tiananmen Square. It was here that Mao Zedong proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China on October 1st, 1949. I walked along the streets of China in sun, rain, snow. I witnessed the pride, strength, and resilience of the Chinese. This photo demonstrates resourcefulness, I think. If you look carefully, you can see the little child there in her little cocoon, protected from the elements. While walking through neighborhoods, I saw only a few homeless people, and the streets were incredibly clean. I explored China without any restrictions. The Chinese do keep track of people. I found that out during a trip to IKEA. I needed a kitchen knife. So I went to IKEA, and when I was in the line to check out, they said, no, you got to go over to that special line. I was like, oh, okay. So I go to buy the knife, and they say, passport, okay. A face scanner, scan my face, and I bought my knife. Before leaving China, I gave the knife to a colleague at CFAU. I asked her, please not to kill anyone with the knife, because the potential murder weapon is forever tied to me. Soon after I got to China, one of my high school friends asked me on Facebook if the United States should be worried about China. I didn't know what to say. But now, after spending 4 months in China, I will offer a few thoughts. China is experiencing some economic troubles right now, including a real estate crisis, but the country is strong. The U.S. has the world's largest domestic product, or GDP, as measured in U.S. dollars. But if adjusted for international currencies, based on what people can buy in the country, China's GDP is now larger than ours. In October, FBI Chief Christopher Wray told CBS News that China represents, quote, the defining threat of this era. There is no country that presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to our ideas, our innovation, our economic security, and ultimately our national security. Some Chinese experts believe it's more complicated than that. We see China as a threat out of fear, former U.S. diplomat Robert Daley told an audience in Jacksonville in February. Daley is director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States. I went to Jacksonville to hear his speech. He said this is the first time since World War II that the U.S. has a peer competitor, and so the tendency is to demonize the Chinese government and people. Daley prefers engagement, but says both countries are now engaged in a new kind of Cold War. Unfortunately, he said, this Cold War will be long and dangerous and sinfully expensive. He contends that the U.S. and China are preparing for long-term hostility and possible war. Quote, both the U.S. and China want to kneecap the other one. This is a tragedy, he said. The chances of a shooting war, he added, are not trivial and increasing. He and other supporters of engagement with China say the U.S. should promote global prosperity through cooperation, openness, transparency, and equal opportunity. Well, despite these concerns, U.S. concerns about China, I have to tell you, I would return in a minute. It's an amazing country. Here are a few of my favorite spots. This is Lijiang, built in the Song Dynasty, late 13th century. I took these photos during a river trip in southern China. While in China, I made a promise to myself. I said I wouldn't turn down any invitation. I wanted to meet as many people as possible and see everything that I could. I told my students that they had an open invitation for lunch, dinner, coffee, whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted, and I'd pay. But the Chinese were so generous. It was really hard to pay. Sometimes they would pay before I had the chance. My students were really helpful in explaining to me how to eat, what to order, everything like that. It was really quite a treat. I met a famous Chinese tattoo artist named Cici. That's Cici on the left. And then this happened.
从来就没吼过我，有一两个还不错。这个还要敷这个。
So I'll explain. Why in the heck would I have this on my arm? My great-grandfather, J.B. Davidson, led a U.S. delegation to China in the late 1940s. He was an agricultural engineer and spent 2 years in China. I wanted to discover evidence of his existence in China. I searched for his house in Nanjing, and I couldn't find it. I did find a 200-foot pagoda known as Spirit Valley Temple, and I realized that this is the same temple that he wrote later that he could see from his house. It was built between 1930 and 1932 as a tribute to soldiers killed during a campaign to unite China. I discovered references to my great-grandfather in books. This is one of the books that has pictures of my great-grandfather. It's in Chinese. This is a professor who has studied my great-grandfather's work and knew all about him. I'll end my talk with a story, another story. This is a story about 5 lions. Actually, it's a story about a young Chinese student I met while trying to retrieve a package. This is how you get your packages when you order them at the university. The packages arrive and they put them on shelves outside. And there are also some lockers. When you get a package, then you get a text message, and if it went to a locker, there's a little code, and you can retrieve it. I was having trouble getting my package. All the messages are in Chinese, so I'm fumbling around. A woman walks up and says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, please." So this student, her nickname is Icarus, helped me out. I got my package, and we started talking. We got to know each other. We talked about all kinds of things. She was studying diplomatic protocol, but said she was really interested in theater. She wanted to write a play. I told her, just do it. Years ago, as a young newspaper correspondent in Mexico, I used the password "just do it" on my computer. I was ripping off Nike, I know, but I needed a constant reminder to myself to get over my fears and go out and do my job. Icarus asked me if I could tell her about a story I was proud of. I told her I once wrote about a Mexico City zoo that was going to kill 5 lions because they didn't have the money to feed them. My story kicked off a campaign that raised $45,000, and then American Airlines sent a cargo plane to pick up the lions and took them to a refuge in Texas. Weeks later, I ran into Icarus again. She told me she was writing a play about the lions, my lions. I couldn't believe it. She found actors and wrote a script and prepared to do this play, and the play debuted at a theater in Beijing. And that to me was absolutely incredible.
Is it asking too much to say for once hello in the morning?
I'm trying to sleep.
Well, I've been trying to...
Saying goodbye to Icarus and everyone else at CFAU was really hard. Icarus wrote me a letter, an incredible 4-page letter talking about what our relationship meant to her. I showed it to my mom and she almost cried. Me too. I'll tell you this because this is the China I discovered. Whether or not we should see China as a threat is a complicated question. I don't have all the answers, but after walking more than 1 million steps through China and meeting people like Icarus, I decided I'm not going to demonize China. I'm not going to demonize people who make up 1/5 of humankind. It's a cliche, maybe naive, maybe too idealistic, but I do hope for a future of peace, tolerance, and understanding.
Hi, greetings. Hey. Hello.